The Zorak did not fear war. For millennia, they had monitored thousands of civilizations, guiding, containing, or pacifying them as needed. Their dominance rested not on violence, but on control, precision, logic, and knowledge. They were observers, archivists, caretakers of balance. But Earth did not fit any known pattern. At first glance, it was a primitive planet. Its dominant species had only recently achieved spaceflight. Nuclear energy was still a novelty. They hadn't colonized a single moon. Yet, the Zorak probe sent to Sector K 22 relayed anomalies impossible to ignore. Within a single century, this species had gone from riding horses to breaking the sound barrier. They had fought wars that consumed continents and then, within decades, formed fragile, imperfect alliances across the planet. The Zorak had seen rapid growth before, but not like this. Humans didn't just innovate, they did so while burning. The probe's data showed footage, grainy recordings of humans celebrating a moon landing, hours after engaging in armed conflict on their homeworld. One hand reached for the stars while the other gripped a rifle. That paradox unnerved the analysts. In their database, most intelligent species followed an upward curve: survival, stability, unity, expansion. But humanity surged forward while dragging chaos behind it. Their art was filled with sorrow. Their literature praised sacrifice. Their games revolved around conflict. The line between their fiction and their history was razor thin. The Council of Observers convened in silence. Each member reviewed the same datasets: millions of broadcasts, intercepted networks, cultural archives. They watched humans mourn tragedies they caused themselves. They saw candlelit vigils for wars started by political whims. They observed humans rescue animals from floods during wars they initiated. Confusion deepened. Emotion existed in many species. But this fusion, grief with brutality, compassion with vengeance, was unlike anything documented. They were self-destructive, yet industrious, volatile yet strategic, capable of kindness as easily as cruelty. One counselor raised the possibility of genetic instability, a mutation that had accelerated their development beyond psychological readiness. Another disagreed. This behavior was too consistent, too historical. The same patterns echoed from ancient ruins to digital broadcasts. A third counselor quietly submitted a proposal: conduct a deeper scan, not of their technology, but of the species itself, their biology, their minds, their evolution. The motion passed unanimously. A reconnaissance ship repositioned itself behind the moon, silent and invisible. What followed was a full-spectrum biological sweep, from environmental adaptation markers to psychological stress mapping. The results alarmed even the most seasoned xenologists. Humans were biologically unlike any race the Zorak had encountered. Their musculature contained repair mechanisms that improved function post-injury. Their bones became denser under repeated stress. Their minds adapted to trauma through neuroplastic restructuring, forming new thought paths around damage. No other species developed this way. Pain usually discouraged repetition. But humans, when broken, rebuilt stronger. They weren't just survivors. They evolved through suffering. Simulations showed horrifying implications. Subjected to extreme duress, humans didn't collapse. They adapted. They learned. And most dangerously of all, they remembered. Across generations, trauma became ritual. Wars became textbooks. Genocide turned into national holidays of remembrance. Human memory was not a scar. It was a weapon sharpened by time. Further scans revealed even stranger traits. Their immune systems were hyperreactive, their endurance unmatched. No other species had run marathons for sport. No others had voluntarily starved in protest. No others had endured freezing peaks or burning deserts as a challenge to conquer. More disturbing still was the neural map. Humans were wired to link aggression and empathy. Where most intelligent beings separated emotion from action, humans intertwined them. Soldiers mourned enemies. Parents sacrificed without hesitation. The same instinct that fueled love also ignited fury. This convergence, the Zorak realized, made them capable of immense loyalty and equally immense violence. The council was split. Half argued these traits made humans unstable and dangerous. The other half insisted they were simply young, still evolving. But both sides agreed humans were different, not by degree but by kind. One final analysis remained. The deep genetic code, the parts that evolution didn't touch lightly, the signatures of design, if they existed. This data came back encrypted, not by human systems. They weren't even aware of it, but by patterns the Zorak had encountered only once before. The encryption matched no natural evolution model. It was deliberate, structured, layered into the genome itself, a dormant complexity that hinted at intentional interference far in the past. Silence filled the council chamber. The oldest Zorak spoke with caution. If this was real, if humans were touched by design, then it wasn't by any known civilization still breathing. Only the ancient races could do this. Only the ones who had vanished without trace. Humans, then, were not random. They were not chaotic accidents of biology. They were something else. Built for extremes. Built to adapt. Built to endure anything. The implications were unbearable. If humanity ever stabilized, if they overcame their internal conflicts, if they pointed to outward instead of inward, what then? Could they be guided, contained, enlightened, or were they a time bomb waiting to awaken? The Zorak had seen wars that burned systems. They had stopped plagues that wiped entire species. But what they saw in humanity was something they had never encountered before. Not malevolence, not evil, purpose, pure, terrifying purpose. And it had teeth. The Zorak did not act out of fear. They acted out of pattern recognition. Every sentient species had a trajectory. Biological evolution created constraints. Psychological development set limits. The Council had mapped these for ages. Peaceful builders, aggressive predators, communal thinkers. But humans had no clean pattern. Their genome whispered something ancient, something engineered. That alone demanded full investigation. The deep dive genetic sequence was unlike anything in their archives. Redundancies within redundancies. Emergency adaptations not seen in natural evolution. Biological mechanisms activated only under duress. The more the Zorak studied it, the clearer the shape became. This species was built to endure catastrophic stress. One gene cluster stood out, designated X-Survivor. It was responsible for a suite of abilities so tightly linked, they behaved like an integrated system. Muscle breakdown and regrowth, rapid myelin repair, cellular reformation during extreme fatigue. This cluster operated silently until a human body experienced damage, hunger, terror, or grief. Then it activated, not for survival, but enhancement. It was not just physiology. The neurological scans were even more disconcerting. Humans rewired their brains under trauma. New neurons formed across damaged pathways. Memory centers expanded. Cortisol resistance increased. One subject, a former soldier, had experienced repeated near-death situations. The scan revealed an astonishing anomaly. His brain had developed a secondary decision matrix during prolonged fear states. Under stress, he became faster, more efficient, and disturbingly calm. That was not natural. It was engineered. The Zorak assembled case files. Civilians surviving starvation with cognitive function intact. Children adapting emotionally to war zones. Entire populations recovering from extinction-level events without societal collapse. They focus on historical epics. The Black Death, the World Wars, nuclear brinkmanship, genocides. And each time, without fail, humanity didn't just survive. They evolved. There was a consistent thread in the data. Humans learned through destruction. No species should have survived what they did, and none should have grown stronger from it. It became clear that human history wasn't tragedy. It was training. They fought wars and built philosophies. They endured slavery and wrote declarations. Their empires crumbled, but their ideas endured. Systems broke. People adapted. No extinction event finished them. Ice, fire, plague, war, famine, climate. They kept rising over and over. The Zorak AI simulations began running predictive outcomes. In almost every scenario, if humans face a galactic-level threat, they didn't fall. They adapted and overcame. Then the projections changed tone. If humanity faced a superior enemy, technologically or physically. The simulations predicted that humans would lose the first engagement, but the second would be even. By the third, humanity would begin to win. And they would not stop, because they learned too fast. Because pain taught them better than instruction. Because every loss became a lesson etched in biology. That should have been impossible. Most species plateaued. Humans didn't. The Zorak began studying human culture more closely. Their mythology was filled with chaos followed by triumph. Gods of war, heroes forged in blood, sacrifice glorified, not out of morbid obsession, but because it mirrored their reality. One anthropologist noted a dangerous idea. Humanity didn't fear war. They revered it, not blindly, but ritualistically, as if conflict was a crucible for truth. Human language reflected this. Words like resilience, resolve, come back, fight on, they weren't slogans. They were identities. Then came the most disturbing observation. Their aggression was not chaotic. It was focused, targeted, often reactive, and when harnessed, it turned into a level of cooperation that bordered on unstoppable. Human armies had stormed beaches under machine gun fire for ideals. They had sent rescue teams into burning reactors. They had run into collapsing towers to save strangers. Their empathy did not make them weak. It made them willing to suffer, willing to die, willing to win, even at unimaginable cost. The Zorak realized they were looking at a contradiction that should not exist. A species that merged brutality with compassion, strategy with instinct, anger with mercy. They were not fragmented. They were layered. One counselor theorized a darker possibility. What if these traits were not accidental? What if humanity's emotional range, adaptability, and combative excellence were intentionally intertwined? What if someone long ago had constructed them for a singular purpose, universal war? The council was silent for hours. Then one of them remembered something from the ancient archives. Project Lucifer, a classified file buried under levels of encryption predating the Zorak's own galactic administration. It referenced failed experiments in species augmentation, emotional volatility, hyperadaptive neural responses. It was labeled as an abandoned initiative from a vanished precursor civilization. The Lucifer file had one surviving clause: final prototype, seeded, location redacted. Cross-referencing revealed the encrypted DNA signatures matched what was found in humanity's genome. The final prototype was human, and the prototype had not just survived, it had flourished. There was no doubt anymore. Humanity had been built. The pain, the power, the paradox, they were all part of the design, and the design worked. The Zorak debated their next move with growing dread. Any attempt to interfere might trigger resistance, and resistance in humanity did not lead to collapse. It led to escalation. They couldn't use fear. Humans embraced fear and turned it into fuel. They couldn't use empathy. Humans would grieve and then retaliate harder. Even time wasn't a deterrent. Humans passed vengeance down generations. The council examined a final simulation. In one timeline, a hostile empire attempted subjugation. Humanity lost billions. But within 50 years, the empire collapsed under relentless counterstrikes, sabotage, and asymmetric warfare. Another simulation showed humans exploring peacefully until provoked. Then diplomacy turned to total war in a single generation. Not out of hate, out of principle, out of memory. The Zorak realized the truth. This species was not peaceful, but it was not evil. It was a living weapon guided by a conscience. The ultimate paradox. They wouldn't start the war, but they would end it, and they would not stop until it was finished. The council dispatched a classified order. Awaken the deep vaults. The oldest archives, sealed since before the Zorak ascended, held fragments of precursor data. Access was restricted to emergencies. Disqualified. Within hours, machines that had not hummed in eon began to stir. Crystalline storage cores powered up. Languages long dead flickered across ancient screens. And there it was, a forgotten war record. Not from a war with humanity, but a war about them. Roughly 600,000 cycles ago, long before Earth had mammals, the galaxy burned under a war not of ideology nor resources, but of fear. A coalition of ancient species discovered a genetic experiment underway in a backwater system, seated on a blue planet rich in unstable variables. It was not a biological weapon, not in the traditional sense. It was worse. It was adaptive consciousness. The theory was bold. What if a species could be bred not to master a single environment, but to master every hardship? One capable of psychological acceleration under stress, not breakdown. One that would treat extinction-level threats as obstacles, not endpoints. One that would treat war not as tragedy, but as opportunity. Most civilizations deemed the project madness, but others, fringe factions with deep labs and no ethical oversight, believed it necessary. They feared a greater threat beyond the galactic rim. Something coming. Something entropy couldn't stop. And so, the first of the human prototypes were seeded. They failed, either too violent or too fragile. Civilizations collapsed trying to contain them. The projects were purged, planets sterilized, whole species erased. But one prototype, unmonitored, overlooked, survived. Earth. When the Council reviewed this history, the implication hit hard. Humanity was never meant to be found. They were abandoned by their creators, buried under time and randomness. The project should have failed. But it didn't. Without guidance, without direction, humans evolved exactly as the original architects intended. Through violence, love, desperation, and fire. They weren't just built for war. They were built for evolution through conflict. The Zorak watched footage again with new understanding. Humanity's fascination with struggle wasn't culture. It was instinct. Their endless pursuit of dominance, meaning redemption. It was coded behavior, optimized over millennia. One ancient entry described the ultimate goal of the project: to create a being that would see the universe not as threat but as challenge, a consciousness that would volunteer for suffering, because it would make them stronger. That was humanity. The Council now faced a decision none of them wanted to make: reveal themselves and risk awakening the sleeping giant, or remain hidden and hope humanity never looked beyond its stars with purpose. Neither choice offered safety. Already humans were reaching. Not just physically with probes, stations, exploration, but ideologically. They were imagining alien life, preparing themselves, not for peace, not for war, for both. They were readying. And readiness, in a species like this, was terrifying. There was still one piece missing. Why? Why create such a species, then leave it alone? What was the point of building a war-adaptive intelligence only to abandon it on a planet without oversight? That question was answered by a single decoded message, buried in the vault's final record. It was brief, fragmented, damaged by age, but its final line was intact. When the dark comes, they will burn brighter. The Zorak historians froze. They knew the phrase, not from science, from prophecy. Millennia-old warnings carved into ruined star temples, scribbled in dead languages on asteroids too ancient to date. Even primitive species across distant systems spoke versions of it. Always the same sentiment. A war is coming that cannot be fought with logic, only with fire. The creators of humanity hadn't built a weapon. They had built a countermeasure. Humanity wasn't just prepared for war. They were the answer to one, and it hadn't arrived yet. That changed everything. The Council convened an emergency session. Fear was no longer their motivator. Necessity was. If the precursors had built humans for a cosmic war that had yet to arrive, then interfering now might break the only hope left. Some argued humanity should be contacted, brought into alliance, educated about their legacy. Others demanded they be monitored silently, left unaware until the threat returned. But one counselor, ancient, cautious, and rarely heard, spoke words that silenced all others. If they were made for the storm, then we must not teach them peace. We must let them grow into the fire. That became policy. No contact, no influence, no interference. Let the humans rise. Let them learn through pain. Let them become what they were built to be. The Zorak ship that had been stationed near Earth quietly departed, not out of fear, but out of respect. The probe self-destructed. Records were sealed. Earth continued unaware. Humanity kept advancing, fighting over old wounds and chasing impossible dreams. But now, somewhere beyond their understanding, an ancient species watched, not as masters, not as enemies, but as guardians of a terrifying truth, that humanity was no accident. They were a match waiting for fuse. And one day, the universe would burn bright with their awakening, because when the darkness finally returns, the last war will not be won by fleets. It will be won by a species who learned to endure everything, who evolved not in peace, but in fury, who do not break. They become. The signal arrived on a Tuesday, not with fanfare, not with invasion, just a transmission, beamed toward Earth from the edge of the Oort cloud. No origin ID, no known frequency, a language unknown to any system. But within hours, human cryptographers broke it, not because it was simple, but because something in the message felt familiar. The message contained a single phrase: "They are coming." It wasn't a threat. It was a warning, accompanied by a data stream filled with partial coordinates, degraded scans, and fragments of another signal, older, lower bandwidth, buried in distortion. The second signal had one key. It originated from the Andromeda expanse, a region every observatory avoided, not for danger, but for silence. It had been empty for millennia. Now, something moved inside it. Humanity reacted the only way it knew how. They built. Nations didn't unite. They adapted. Alliances shifted overnight. The orbital construction yards went full scale. Research black sites opened classified files. Programs that had been frozen for decades were reactivated. And quietly, without media, without ceremony, a council of human leaders convened in a sealed base beneath Antarctica. The agenda was short: evaluate the threat, prepare Earth's response, and decode the deeper truth behind the transmission. Because someone out there knew humanity wasn't normal. Someone knew what they were made for. Weeks passed. The decoded fragments grew clearer. The second signal was ancient, not a call for help, not a beacon. It was a relay, one designed to wake something up. And that something was us. Buried in the metadata were coordinates pointing back to Earth, not just to the planet, to sites deep beneath it. Archaeological teams move fast. Dig sites open under major fault lines, mountain ranges, and buried impact craters. What they found defied history. Mega structures, fused with Earth's crust, power cores long dormant, databanks filled with linguistic markers that matched no known human dialect, but mirrored neural patterns in the brain. These weren't alien ruins. They were instruction manuals. And one of them finally opened. No key, no tech. It responded to human DNA. Inside was a message, written in perfect modern English. You are the last defense, and the first retaliation. Panic turned into grim purpose. Every nation understood. The transmission wasn't a threat to Earth. It was a signal to Earth. The final phase had begun. The data from the Andromeda expanse was now clear enough to interpret. An object, no, a structure, was approaching. Not FDL, not a ship. It was too large. It was a seed, a cosmic contagion, a biological intelligence that consumed consciousness, not just matter. The last time it arrived, it devoured 3 galactic civilizations. The records were erased. But the builders of humanity had faced it and failed, so they created a weapon they couldn't control. A species that would not bow, would not obey, would not go mad. One that would resist instinctively. One that could hate when hope was gone. Humanity. The builders didn't leave instructions. They left provocation. Because provocation would wake the human core. The aggression, the rage, the ingenuity. It worked. Earth's orbit filled with defenses. Prototypes emerged from hidden labs. AI fused with soldier instinct. Human minds merged with machines, but refused to give up autonomy. No hive mind, no collective consciousness. Humanity would remain independent. That was the key. Because the thing coming, this cosmic mind, it did not consume flesh. It consumed will. It spread through surrender. Unity, peace, harmony. It offered quiet, order. But humans don't want peace. Not like that. They want meaning, struggle, fire. And so, Earth's skies bristle with steel and stubbornness. First contact happened far from Earth. A colony ship en route to Kepler. 442b disappeared mid-jump. Another one sent a distorted image before going dark. An orbiting black lattice, alive and absorbing thought. The threat was confirmed. Then came the anomaly. A fleet of unknown ships appeared near Jupiter, non-hostile, emitting council tags. The Zorak had returned, but not as conquerors, as witnesses. They sent no ambassadors, no demands, just a final message. We are not your enemy. We only ask to stand behind you. For the first time, humans were seen, not as primitives, not as curiosities, but as the galaxy's apex contingency, the ones built for the fire. And now, the fire had come. The seed approached Earth space. Gravity wells distorted. Dreams across the planet filled with static. Entire populations began to feel watched, not by eyes, but by something deeper, something that wanted them to surrender, to obey. It whispered comfort, unity, peace. But humanity had been bred for discomfort, born of chaos, sharpened by agony. They didn't bend. They remembered wars fought in mud and steel, skies lit with firestorms, civilizations rebuilt from ash, children born in bunkers who grew to build nations. They remembered every loss, every betrayal, every hand pulled from rubble, and they answered with silence, not submission, preparation. When the seed finally entered range, it met resistance unlike anything in the galaxy's history. Not because Earth's weapons were superior. They weren't. But because Earth's people refused to break. Their minds didn't sink. Their hearts didn't unify. Their rage didn't dissolve. It focused. The seed fractured, not from explosions, from rejection, from incompatible thought, from a species whose deepest design was to suffer and then stand back up. The battle wasn't won in space. It was won in the human soul, in their refusal to surrender, in the sacred value they placed on freedom, even in death. The Zorak watched it happen. The seed recoiled, shattered, fled. No species had done that. No other civilization had fought the idea of control and beaten it. Humanity didn't just survive. They proved the design was right. They were the storm. And now the galaxy knew the whispers would spread, not of horror, but of hope, because somewhere at the edge of chaos, a species existed that would never kneel, that would never forget. And if darkness came again, the humans would be waiting, angry, awake, and ready